I'm going to give you 9 tips to help you find more birds in the winter. So the first one is to find open water. And so a really good way to attract birds, especially birds that don't come to your bird feeders, is to add a little heater into your bird bath. I'll put a link to some in the video description below, but basically what this does is it just keeps your bird bath warm enough to stay ice-free so that then birds can come in and drink and take a bath, which they still have to do all those things in the winter. So if you can provide open water, you're probably going to attract more birds. Next one is to make sure you have bird seed that is not covered in snow. If you have like a table feeder or a tray feeder, those usually aren't the best type of feeders for the winter because when snow comes down, it's going to cover your seeds and then birds are going to have a harder time finding them. Tube feeders or hopper feeders are typically good ways to go, but make sure that snow doesn't clog them because while birds can get through the snow to find seed, it's going to be a lot easier for them if you just keep it clear of snow so then they can access the seeds easier. Next one is to pay attention to what habitat you're in. Certain habitats in the winter can have more birds than others. For example, in farm fields, during the summer, you're probably not going to find very many birds there. You might find some sparrows. But in the winter, in certain places, you can find some longspurs that have come south for the winter. Depending on what part of the country you're in, you could maybe even see some mountain plovers too. Another habitat to pay attention to is open water. Some waterfowl are more concerned with finding open water than about the temperature. So even though it might be really cold outside, if there's some open water at a nearby reservoir or pond, there could quite possibly be some waterfowl there. Tip number 3 is to listen for owls. Owls are more actively calling in the winter because that is when they nest. So while you could still hear owls in the spring, summer, and fall, the winter is going to be the best time to listen for and look for them because that is when they're most actively calling, and there's no leaves on the trees, which makes it easier to spot them. For tip number 4, I've got 3 specific kinds of birds that you should be looking for in the winter. The first one is finches. Northern finches will often come south in the winter looking for more food, and so the more scarce pine cones become in the north, the farther south the birds are going to come. I remember a couple of years ago I had 2 common redpolls come to our bird feeders, and common redpolls are usually a northern species, but when pine cones become scarce in the north, they come south looking for more food, and that food might just be your bird feeder. Another group of birds to look for is gulls. Gulls are really hard to separate, but a lot of northern gulls end up coming south for the winter. Like I said earlier, gulls are really hard to separate, so you're probably going to have to get out a field guide or go with a local expert to figure out what gulls you're looking at. And the last group of birds to look for is geese. A lot of geese breed up north in Canada and Alaska, and that means that in the winter they're going to come south. So in the fall and winter, make sure to look for flyover flocks of geese. The 5th tip is to find a spot to look for sandhill crane. When sandhill cranes winter, they gather in huge numbers. In certain places, sandhill cranes gather in huge numbers. And so I know Goose Pond Wildlife Area has a lot of them in the winter, and there's a lot of places all over the Midwest that have a ton of sandhill cranes in the winter. And it's a lot of fun to see just thousands of sandhill cranes in local farm fields. Tip number 6 is to pay attention to mixed flocks. In the winter, small birds like chickadees, titmice, and kinglets form small mixed flocks to stay together and find food. And so if you see one small bird like a chickadee, pay attention because there might be some golden crown kinglets mixed in with it. Another tip is bird food sources change in the winter. So while berries might not get a whole lot of attention in the summer, in the winter it's going to be a bird's primary food source because there are now not a whole lot of insects out. And so planting some bushes that produce berries in the winter can be a great way to attract some more birds. And the last tip is to go someplace warm like the Rio Grande Valley. In the winter, the valley is full of rare and exciting species, and it's really hot there in the summer, which means the winter is the best time to go. I've been to the Rio Grande Valley several times, and if you want to see the adventure video that I made earlier this year to get a feel for some of the local species and hotspots, go and click or tap right here.